In this video, I'm going to share 25 very common mistakes that new players make when they first pick up Oblivion. And make sure you stick around until the end because the last few tips could literally keep you out of jail. Now, the first few common mistakes that I want to talk about are around how you build your character. And the first one of these is something that can completely ruin your playthrough, and that is falling into the level scaling trap. Basically, it can be a pretty big mistake to grind your non-combat skills in order to rapidly increase your character level without also keeping your core combat skills up to speed. And this is actually really easily done in Oblivion. For example, you could choose to grind out, say, lockpicking and mercantile before you even get involved in a single fight after the tutorial. And because the game lets you do it, it would be fair for a new player to assume that it was totally normal and okay to do. However, it really isn't, and this is because in Oblivion, enemies will scale to your level, and when they do, it significantly increases their health and damage. The problem here is that if you haven't leveled up your combat skills, then you're going to massively struggle to defeat even the weakest enemies once they've been scaled up, and you certainly won't be killing them with your intricate lockpicking skills or your silver-tongued negotiating ability. So rather than power leveling in this way, ensure that you're keeping the core combat skills of your build up to speed as well. There are caveats to this, as any Oblivion veteran would know, and if you know what you're doing, then there are certain technically non-combat skills that you could power level early on for a massive advantage. Alchemy being probably the most obvious one, but as this guide is aimed at new players, I'd suggest saving doing things like power leveling Alchemy up front for your second playthrough, once you have a better understanding of how that might fit into your build. Speaking of builds, I know that in other RPGs there are a group of players that do tend to rush through character creation. They don't have a great deal of interest in it and they just want to get to the action. Now in Oblivion, technically you can rush through character creation, at least for the most part. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't understand why people do it, but they do. And for the most part, you can get away with it and still have a decent playthrough. A poor race choice and even a poor selection of major skills isn't the end of the world. It's going to make the game unnecessarily slow and difficult, especially at higher difficulty settings, but it's not going to totally ruin your playthrough. However, there are a couple of massive traps that you can fall into by blindly picking your birth sign, and these can result in disaster. And that is if you land on the Atronach or Apprentice birth sign without paying proper attention to their downsides. And trust me, I've had multiple comments where people have done this. It's not just some mad fantasy that I've made up. The problem here is that mispicking most birth signs would just mean that you missed out on a few relevant benefits to your build. However, the Atronach and Apprentice are quite different because the Atronach will actually completely stop your magic regen and the Apprentice will make you 100% more vulnerable to all types of magic damage. They have significant upsides as well, but they're generally considered quite niche birth sign choices that are usually used by more experienced players who know how to mitigate the downsides as well as making best use of the upsides. Whereas as a new player, being 100% more vulnerable to all types of magic, especially if you try to play on a higher difficulty, is just going to result in you dying constantly and probably getting really frustrated with the game. So if you're one of those people who rush through character creation, then at the very least ensure that you read the birth sign descriptions for these two in particular, as like I said, it could completely ruin your playthrough. Unless you do plan to create a proper build around that birth sign, of course. However, if you do just want to set and forget, then I would suggest going with a simple birth sign that offers a skill or attribute bonus that's relevant to your desired playstyle. Birth signs like the Warrior, Mage, Thief and Lady. Or another option, probably the best option of all actually, is to go with the Lord, basically because it gives you a really nice bonus to both magical damage resistance and armor rating, and that's just going to remain useful throughout the entire game. Now, on the subject of skills, if any of your skills do start to fall behind, especially the skills that you're most reliant on, then don't miss out on using skill trainers to bring them back up to speed. Skill trainers are scattered all over the world in Oblivion, and you can use them to train up to 5 times per level. To be clear, that's 5 times combined across all skill trainers. You can't train 5 times in every single skill each level. However, this can make a massive difference when it comes to some of the more difficult to level skills such as destruction and restoration magic, providing you're not using some kind of self-damage and heal grind to level them in a less organic fashion, let's say. That leads to another mistake actually, and that's not reading skill books. Basically, in Oblivion there are books scattered all over the world, as you might have noticed, and if you're new to the Elder Scrolls, it may not occur to you that reading these books offers anything but a snippet of the game's lore. However, many of these books, I believe over 100 in total, will actually offer you a skill increase when you read them, and it can add up to quite a significant increase through the course of an entire playthrough. So when you see a book you haven't read before, it's worth quickly opening it up to see if it has a skill to offer. One final thing that I want to mention with regard to leveling that may not be immediately obvious is that some quests reward you with leveled items, weapons and armor basically. Therefore, these items will be much stronger if you're a higher level when you complete the quest. So if you're planning on a longer playthrough and you want to get the most out of your build, then you may want to avoid making the mistake of rushing these kinds of quests early on and ending up with a weak version of the reward. This is because once you've got that low level version, it can never be upgraded. So to avoid regret, do a bit of research on the best items for your build, and if any of them are scaled quest rewards, then maybe consider waiting until you're a higher level to complete that particular quest. Speaking of items, let's use that as our segue into the next section of tips, which are all around handling your loot and equipment wisely. One classic RPG mistake that applies not just to Oblivion but to the majority of games in the genre is stockpiling potions but never actually using them. Let's face it, we've all been guilty of potion hoarding. You collect dozens of healing and buff potions throughout your playthrough, then you hesitate to use them because you're saving them for later. Next thing you know, the credits are rolling and you're still holding 137 weak magicka potions because, just in case. Who knows, there could be a secret boss encounter after the credits. Now I'd argue that this is an even bigger mistake in Oblivion than most other RPGs, and that's because the impact of alchemy in this game is massive. Honestly, it's not just healing and magicka potions. Alchemy can make you borderline unkillable, which we'll talk about a bit more later in the video. So don't be overly stingy with your potions, they're there to be used after all, and they can easily be your ticket to success when it comes to higher difficulty settings. A related mistake here is hoarding junk and getting yourself over encumbered. New players often try to loot and carry literally everything, every piece of rusty iron armor, random cups and plates, vases, basically any old crap they come across during their adventures. The problem here is that this is an Elder Scrolls game and the world is literally full with this kind of rubbish, and as immersive as that is, if you make an attempt to loot it all, then you'll quickly find yourself over encumbered and barely able to move. To avoid this, I'd suggest that you only loot items with a good weight to value ratio, so enchanted light armor, gems, jewelry, that kind of thing. That way you're going to save yourself countless trips back and forth to the vendors after you've looted your 17th set of rusty iron armor, only to be able to flog it for pennies. Also, going back to alchemy, I'd highly recommend always carrying a few feather potions with you, as they'll temporarily increase your carry capacity, saving you having to abandon items in order to make your way back out of a dungeon, for example. On the subject of vendors, you may notice that different vendors in the game have different amounts of gold available to them. This can actually be increased by investing in their stores by leveling the mercantile perk. However, the most important thing to know early on is that a merchant can only pay up to the maximum amount of gold that they have available for an item, regardless of the item's real value. So basically they rip you off. Now, to mitigate this, what you need to do is find a wealthier merchant who, most importantly, will buy any item from you regardless of your mercantile skill level, which is actually a fairly rare combination. The best example of a vendor who has a decent amount of gold and will buy literally anything is a guy called Nilphas O'Malion, who can be found in the Merchant's Inn in the Imperial City Market District. He's the vendor for the Battlehorn Castle player house upgrades and has 2,000 gold available even without investing in his store. Another really important use of vendors in Oblivion is to repair your equipment, and a pretty common mistake is failing to do so. And I think that's because people don't necessarily clock that their equipment's broken in the first place, and the fact that it's significantly less effective when in this state, which could easily be the end of you in a more difficult fight. Merchants who sell armor and weapons tend to be the ones who also offer the option to repair your equipment, so visit them frequently to avoid making your dungeon crawls harder than they need to be. Of course, you can actually repair on the go in Oblivion, which is why it's such a massive mistake to sell the repair hammers that you find, as these are going to allow you to repair your equipment regardless of your location. The problem is, you don't actually find that many of them, and the armor skill that governs them is actually quite slow to level. So, as per my early tip, I'd suggest that Armourer is a good one to go to skill trainers for, as without doing so, you'll quickly start to get items that are too high level for you to repair due to your Armourer skill being too low. It's a bit of extra effort, but it does make exploration smoother and it avoids you having to constantly return to town or carry a load of spare equipment for when your main set inevitably breaks. Speaking of equipment, another mistake that new players make is not carrying a magical weapon, and this is because many new players, quite understandably, don't realise that certain enemies in Oblivion can't be harmed by normal weapons. This applies primarily to ethereal undead, such as ghosts and wraiths. To damage these enemies, you'll either need to use magic, or failing that, a magical or enchanted weapon. Some weapon types are considered magic by default, such as silver and daedric weapons, and there are also a number of unique weapons that are also considered to be magical despite never actually telling you that. For example, the Blade of Woe that you can get early on in the Dark Brotherhood questline. Then on top of this, if you have an enchanted weapon, the magical damage caused by that enchantment will also be able to harm ethereal foes. So basically, if you don't have any offensive magic available to you, then make sure that when you find that first silver weapon that you hang on to it, because you never know when you might need it. The final mistake I want to cover when it comes to loot and equipment is not taking advantage of the quick access system, otherwise known as the favourites menu or the favourites wheel. Basically, the game provides you with this favourites wheel that you can bring up at any point during gameplay without having to constantly open your inventory. This is far more impactful than it sounds, as Oblivion's inventory system still isn't the smoothest to navigate, and jumping in and out multiple times in a fight to switch between spells or to use different scrolls and potions is pretty immersion breaking. The slots on this quick access menu are also numbered, which means if you're playing on PC, you can even use your number keys to switch between spells and items without ever having to even bring up the menu on screen. This is a huge quality of life feature, and as someone who plays on both Xbox and PC, I find it infuriating every time I have to bring up the quick access menu on my Xbox. Anyway, let's move on to some combat and exploration based mistakes. Well, firstly, it's worth pointing out that Oblivion isn't a mindless hack and slash. If you just charge in and spam melee attacks with no thought or preparation, you're probably going to have a bad time, unless you're playing on a lower difficulty setting, and then you'll probably get away with it. But even when using this lower difficulty approach, you'll probably find the game's combat feels a little lackluster. And that's because, at a basic level, the combat in Oblivion is, well, basic. We've been treated to games like Elden Ring in recent years, and from a mechanical combat perspective, Oblivion is just a relic in comparison. But the joy in Oblivion combat doesn't come from the basic melee or ranged mechanics in my opinion, it comes from the incredible depth of builds and combat styles available to you. It's all in the preparation with these types of RPG, not the actual execution of the combat itself. So take time to plan your build, pick your weapons and spells wisely, weave in alchemy and enchanting, and trust me, you'll get a far more enjoyable combat experience as a result. Building on the previous mistake, another pretty common issue that I see many newcomers having is neglecting to block, dodge, and just generally take advantage of tactical timing, and then wondering why enemies keep wrecking them. In Oblivion Remastered, a successful block can drastically reduce the damage you take and even stagger your foe, and a well-timed dodge can avoid damage entirely. So making best use of these mechanics and also timing your strikes between enemy swings is not only vital for higher difficulties, for certain builds at least, but also offers a far more rewarding combat experience in general. For example, raising your shield or weapon just in time to block a heavy blow and then launching a heavy counterattack that staggers the enemy, giving you an opening to cast a powerful spell, can be immensely satisfying. So use all of the tools at your disposal for a more effective and enjoyable combat approach. Speaking of which, after a fight, you might notice that your attributes in the menu are coloured red and your character doesn't seem to be as effective, and they also might be making some weird noises. That's probably because you've caught a disease or have some other negative effect applied to your character. Now, many characters in Oblivion carry these kinds of diseases, and if you're not paying attention, then you are effectively just gimping your character unnecessarily. Technically, you could just ignore this and continue to play in a weakened state, though I wouldn't recommend it. However, the one disease that you absolutely should not ignore is one called porphyric hemophilia, which can be contracted from vampiric enemies, and you can probably guess what it does. Yep, Leave this untreated for more than 3 in-game days and you'll turn into a vampire. Which can be pretty cool if that's what you want to do, but it's a huge hassle if you don't, and it does come with a whole bunch of downsides. So I'd recommend always carrying Cure Disease potions, as well as Cure Poison and Dispel potions, and being extra vigilant when taking on vampires. Another really simple thing that new players may not have noticed is that you can get a completely free full restoration of your health, magicka and fatigue at any time whilst you're out of combat. This can be done simply by using the rest function. Even resting for a single hour will offer you this, and will therefore save you a ton of potions or save you from ploughing into the next set of enemies with depleted resources. I know this is blindingly obvious to someone who's played an Elder Scrolls game before, but perhaps not to somebody new, so I thought I'd better mention it. The only limitation to this feature is that you can't do it while enemies are nearby. Another thing that happens when you rest is that the game autosaves, which leads to my next major mistake, and that's not saving often enough, or relying on a single save slot. Oblivion mostly autosaves when you transition between areas or when you rest, which means that if you do neither of these things for a while, for example spending multiple hours exploring the open world, then if you die, or even worse the game crashes, then you're going to lose all of that progress. So make plenty of both quick saves and manual saves as often as possible to avoid this heartbreaking occurrence. It's also worth noting that a particularly relevant place to make a manual save is just before you leave the sewers at the end of the game's tutorial, as what this is going to allow you to do is go back and change your character's race, class and birth sign without having to complete the entire tutorial again. Also, as I mentioned, try not to rely on a single save file, as if that file is somehow corrupted, or if you accidentally lock in a game-breaking bug with that save, well, your playthrough is pretty much over. One more point I want to make in relation to exploration is not to ignore Oblivion Gates. Once you complete the Finding the Air quest early in the main storyline, Oblivion Gates will start spawning all over the map, and while they may be optional, and to be honest can be a bit repetitive, I'd suggest that you don't ignore them. This is because they can offer you powerful enchanted weapons and armor, rare alchemy ingredients, and most importantly, at the end of each Oblivion Gate you'll find a sigil stone, which will allow you to add powerful enchantments to your weapons and armor. The enchantments from high-level sigil stones are some of the best in the game, so even if you just jump into the Oblivion Gate and book it straight for the top of the tower to get the sigil stone, it's worth your time. Next up, I want to move on to some mistakes new players often make with regards to magic and crafting, as these are easily the most overpowered features in the game, and if you're using them wrong or neglecting them entirely, you're really missing out. Firstly, the ability to create custom spells and enchant your gear are some of Oblivion's greatest strengths, and by ignoring these two features, you're missing out on some of the most brokenly fun features of the game. As already discussed, enchanting can make your equipment substantially more powerful, and custom spell making will allow you to pull together some pretty crazy combination of spells to come up with effectively your own unique approach to magic use. You could make a ludicrously powerful destruction spell that basically one-shots anything, or you could combine schools of magic to summon a powerful Daedra while in the same click casting a whole range of buffs and heals on yourself. It's also really easy to unlock both of these features in the remaster and start to use them immediately due to the fact that you have immediate access to Frostcrag Spire as a player house, which offers both enchanting and spell making altars. The only issue here is that you need 2 boxes of Mage Tallow candles to activate them, which will set you back over 3,000 gold per box. However, if you really are strapped for cash, then you can also progress the Mages Guild questline to unlock the same altars for free. It'll just take a fair bit longer. Either way, I'd suggest doing it early so you get to enjoy these awesome features for as much of your playthrough as possible. Once you have managed to enchant a weapon, you'll probably notice that it only has a set number of charges, which leads into my next new player mistake, and that is neglecting to recharge these weapons using either vendors or soul gems. You can find a vendor who does this for you in the Mystic Emporium in the Imperial City Market District, as well as in many other locations such as the various Mages Guilds. The problem in the early game is that it's really bloody expensive, so you may want to consider using your charged soul gems to recharge your weapons by clicking those soul gems in your inventory. Of course, if your soul gems are empty, then you are going to need to go and use the soul trap spell on an enemy just before it dies to capture its soul and fill the gem. Word of warning here, higher level soul gems can be quite rare and you need them for enchanting, so I'd suggest not wasting these on recharging your weapons, just stick to the lower quality soul gems for this. Actually, that leads neatly into another new player mistake, and that's carelessly vendoring or just throwing away valuable artifacts without realizing their potential. Oblivion veterans will no doubt know that I am thinking specifically about Azura's Star in this case, due to the fact that I led into this tip after talking about Enchanting. Basically, while all other soul gems are single use, Azura's Star is an infinitely refillable grand level soul gem, which this makes it invaluable on the basis that grand soul gems are actually quite difficult to come by. Azura's Star will basically allow you to infinitely enchant items at the highest level without ever having to worry about running out of gems, though you will of course need to replenish the soul within the star each time. And this is just one example, so each time you pick up a unique item, such as one of the game's many Daedric artifacts, consider whether it might have some utility worth keeping, as you won't get a second chance. Another feature that you would be crazy to ignore in Oblivion is of course Alchemy. Alchemy is basically free power if you invest just a little bit of time in it, and yet lots of new players still neglect to ever even click on the mortar and pestle they get in the tutorial. And they just end up missing out on such a fun and powerful feature. Alchemy lets you craft potions from the ingredients that you find all over the world that can heal you, restore your magicka, buff your stats, turn you invisible, give you magical resistance, and the list just goes on and on. Then on top of that you have poisons, which can be applied to your weapons to do massive amounts of damage to enemies, enabling you to crush tougher fights even on the highest difficulty settings. And then on top of this, alchemy can also make you a ton of gold. This is because the simple act of combining ingredients increases their gold value, as the output potion will always be worth more than the sum total of the ingredients. When you reach 100 alchemy skill, you can even make potions with a single ingredient, which is just a license to print money, as ingredients are simply everywhere in the game. I always like to use the example of going to the game's various farms or the vineyard just outside of Skingrad and just converting all of the produce there into potions and making some of the easiest gold available in the game. So yeah, don't skip alchemy. Now in this brief final section, I want to cover the more shadowy side of Cyrodiil, rounding things off with a few mistakes I see people make with regard to crime in Oblivion. The first and most simple mistake is just misunderstanding the criminal system entirely, or not even realizing that it exists. If you're a player who's totally new to the Elder Scrolls series, basically, if you steal an item or assault an NPC in Oblivion in front of witnesses, then you will immediately have a bounty placed upon your head. Guards from all across the land will somehow instantly be aware of your crimes, presumably due to them sharing it in their group WhatsApp, and as soon as you enter any city, they will attempt to arrest you. You then have a few options. You can choose to resist arrest, which will result in them attempting to kill you. If your disposition with the guard is high enough and the bounty is below, I think it's 1,000 gold, you may be able to get them to let you off. Or you can choose to submit to them by either paying the fine or by going to jail. Now, going to jail should always be your last resort, and that's because this will cause you to actually lose skill points in a random set of your skills, which in my view is far more annoying than losing a bit of gold. However, the best way to get out of trouble with the law is, well, not to break the law in the first place, I suppose, but more realistically, to be a member of the Thieves Guild. This is due to the fact that if you're caught breaking the law as a member of the Thieves Guild, you can resist arrest, run from the guards, and then visit a Thieves Guild fence, such as Armand Christophe, and have them bribe the guards to let you off the hook. The beauty of this is that this allows you to clear your bounty for half the cost. So if you're going to be a criminal, at least be a smart one and don't pay your bounties off the expensive way. Instead, join the Thieves Guild today. Finally, if you do insist on being a criminal, then you're going to end up needing to pick a lot of locks. So don't make the mistake of lockpicking the hard way and get your hands on the skeleton key as soon as you hit level 10. Basically, this key allows you to infinitely spam the auto attempt button until you're successful, and this is due to the fact that it's unbreakable. It completely trivializes lockpicking to the point that you never really have to think about it again. Unless you really love the challenge of lockpicking, of course, but realistically, it's not even a challenge. And the reason for this is there's a very simple technique that trivializes lockpicking. I explained this in my last video, but just to summarize, basically each time you knock a pin up, you'll notice that it comes down at a different speed, and that speed is reset every time the pin reaches the bottom. All you need to do is wait for the pin to get to its slowest speed, and then just don't let it hit the bottom again. Keep tapping it back up until you get your eye in, and then lock it into place. It's really easy to do when the pin is moving at its slowest speed. And this then works for locks of any difficulty. It's exactly the same thing. Anyway, once you do reach level 10, all you need to do to get the skeleton key is to travel to the Shrine of Nocturnal, which can be found north of Leowyn at this location on the map, and then simply interact with the shrine to begin a quest called the Missing Eye of Nocturnal. And once you complete that quest, you will be rewarded with the skeleton key. Anyway, hopefully that should help you to successfully navigate your way around some of these common new player mistakes. If you enjoyed the video, maybe consider subscribing, and if you want even more content or just to support the channel in general, then I also post exclusive videos for both YouTube and Patreon members, and you can get access to those videos by clicking the links that I will share in the description down below. Either way, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.